We had to figure out what's causing that to happen. We have a little bit of a problem with the video, so we're fixing that real quick. And he knows what he's doing and I don't. All right, good deal. All right, Matthew chapter 12 and verses 33 through 37. For this short lesson, we're going to be discussing a metaphor that Jesus used in his teaching to show the importance of righteousness in the life we live. It's one that's similar to that found in John chapter 15, but the metaphor is a bit different because rather than talking about not having fruit or not bearing fruit, it's talking about the type of fruit we bear, good fruit or bad fruit. I would like to read to you verses 33 through 37 of Matthew chapter 12, where our Lord says, either make the tree good and its fruit good, or else the tree bad and its fruit bad, for a tree is known by its fruit. Brood of vipers, how can you, being evil, speak good things? For out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. The good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth good things, and an evil man out of the evil treasure brings forth evil things. But I say to you that for every idle word men may speak, they will give an account of it in the day of judgment. For by your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. Now, when we look at our society today and the fact that words are often not what they ought to be, not what the Bible enjoins upon us, this is a special discussion we ought to have from time to time, especially as we are told it is difficult for us to control our speech. Even Christians who would not consider perhaps more what we might say are egregious sins or more ostentatious sins, the breaking of laws and the engaging in lewd activities, those kinds of things, it is nevertheless difficult sometimes for us to work on our speech. And the word that we want to emphasize in our lesson today is that of speech. So we want to talk about the importance of righteous speech, but I do want you to understand that this principle here concerning good fruit and bad fruit covers much more than that. Now, in the metaphor, Jesus is speaking specifically about trees that bear fruit. I went and tried to do a little look up on the internet as to what kind of trees bear fruit, and there are a lot of them. Deciduous trees, various fruit trees, for example, and pecans and chestnuts and walnuts and those kinds of things. Those are usually deciduous trees. And then you've got the citrus trees, the lemons and oranges and limes, as well as tropical trees that might give you avocados or figs or things like that. So they're all sorts of trees that we can think about, and they all come down to this. They're not worth much if they're not giving you good fruit. And that's kind of the concept we want to share with. A good tree is one. How do you define a good tree? If it is a fruit tree, as well, does it give you good fruit or not? If it's bad fruit, then it's not a good tree. And there are many reasons why this could happen. In fact, we could do an entire sermon giving spiritual analogs to things like maybe pest infestation or environmental stress or improper pollination and other environmental factors that might come up that is a cause for such bad fruit to come about. But that's not really our purpose. We're going to simply look at the text itself and make a few points from it in our short lesson today. But I would like to give you an example, and that is my own pecan trees out in my front yard. We live in River Oaks, and so there are an awful lot of oak trees, but in our house, the two big trees that we have in our front yard are pecan trees. And they're not good for anything, except they shower this sappy stuff on our cars about twice a year, and they shed a lot, and their limbs break easy. But the reason for that, I don't know. They give pecans. They don't give as many as a lot of pecan trees do, but the pecans are smaller and they're harder to break than like the paper shells that we typically see in the stores, and maybe you have in your own location. And we've got squirrels, and boy, those squirrels like those pecans, so we don't really get many of them. But you look down here at this building, and this building actually is known throughout the community as, hey, they've got good pecan trees there at Westside. And when I had my office here at the building rather than doing most of my work at home, it would not be uncommon for me to walk out the front door and there is someone just from the community that decided they were going to harvest pecans from our trees. And so they would be out there picking up pecans. I never had a heart to tell them, hey, this is private property, you should get off. I just let them make their pies in that regard. But they're good pecan trees. And so there is a difference between those things. Now, I do want to remind you of the text in John 15 in verse 6. The entire context there deals with a vine and whether the vine bears fruit or not. But verse 6 of the text, Jesus said, if anyone does not abide in me, he is cast out as a branch and is withered, and they gather them and throw them into the fire, and they are burned. And the whole point of that is to say that as a branch in the vine, if you are not doing what it is your purpose to do, and that is bearing fruit for the master, then you are worthless, and as such, you will be cut off. And so do understand this, that intrinsically this text, as well as John 15, is talking about the possibility of apostasy, the fact that going outside of or becoming unfruitful in the work that we give to the master is something that can cost us eternally. And so this is a very important lesson for us to learn. But our illustration here is not so much not bearing fruit, but the type of fruit that we bear. So let's just consider a couple of points made by the several verses that we have today. The first thing is, the only way that we can know whether or not you are faithful is by the fruit that you bear. And that is an important thing for us to consider. What he says here is that the tree is known by its fruit. Either make the tree bad and its fruit bad, or else make the tree good and its fruit good. For by the fruit a tree is known. Now, of course, the metaphor is intended to describe people, and it is, again, an indication that we have free will. We can choose to do things that would be considered by God as good, or we can choose to do things that would be considered by God to be bad. But the only way that the world around us can know, and I would say that God can know, because the proof is in the pudding, if you will, but the way in which we are known as being good or bad is by the fruit that we bear. It's not acceptable to God to become his child and then not bear fruit or bear bad fruit. It's just not something that he accepts. And so defined by God, then your fruit would be bad and you would be subject to judgment as a result of that bad fruit. Kyle Pope, in his truth commentary on this passage, he said that man's true nature is not shown by his intentions. You'll hear that a lot. Well, I meant to, but you didn't. That's the whole point. And it's not shown by his appearance. Oh, he looks like a good person, or outwardly and his mannerisms and his friendliness and such, he seems really, really good. No, not even by his words, when a person may speak things that are righteous things, but if the fruit that he is bearing is not good, it's the full produce of his life that determines whether or not a man is truly righteous or not. The entirety of his life, the full produce, using the language we use with regard to fruit. So, having established that, we want to emphasize again that here the context is specifying and emphasizing speech, but it does impact all of our lives. One of the problems in the first century with regard to good speech is that typically, or if the specific instance where they were is something that would be beneficial to them, the Pharisees could have good speech. They would stand on the street corners and with an idea that they were mourning or penitent or they were religious. They would fast before men to be seen of men. And yet it wasn't that their actual fruit was as they expressed it before those that were present. And so we need to recognize it's much more than speech that we need to consider. So let's talk, however, about the speaking for a moment. I want you to note in verse 34 of Matthew chapter 12, it says, "Brood of vipers, how can you, being evil, speak good things? Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks." I have used this example several times recently just because it irks me. On Fox channel, which I watch Fox News in the background while I'm doing my work a lot of times. So you'll have commercials. They happen time and time again. Almost the same companies do the commercials. But one of the commercials is for an app that was put out by the Catholic Church called Hallow, and it assists you in praying. And I've mentioned this before, but two of the celebrities that they take to advertise that app and get people praying, they profess themselves to be pleasing to God, diligent Catholics, and yet their lives are characterized by drinking, debauchery, profanity, various types of worldliness. So either they haven't considered what God would have them to do, they've got their own views about what it means to be righteous and pleasing before God that doesn't include their speech, that doesn't include some of their actions. Maybe it is that they're ignorant of it because they simply have not studied as they should to determine these things. Or maybe they're just fooling themselves. And I think that happens to a lot of us. We fool ourselves to think we're better than other people, or we're good enough to please God. And by comparing ourselves with ourselves, we're not wise. The only standard that matters is what God has to say. And this is what God has to say on the matter. In James chapter 1 and verse 26, concerning our speech, James said, "If anyone among you thinks that he is religious, but does not bridle his tongue, he deceives his own heart. This one's religion is useless." And so, what you say does matter, doesn't it? And if you're not able or willing to bridle, put a bridle upon your tongue, limit what it is that you say, then your religion, he says, is useless. In Psalm 19 and verse 12, the wise man asked God to cleanse me from secret faults. It is possible for us to deceive our own hearts, to be deceived with regard to the state that we are in before God. But often our actions or our speech belie the actual truth. And again, our speech is a primary consideration here, but I do want to note again that anything that is against God's will comes from a heart that is bringing forth bad fruit. You look there again at verses 35 and 36. A good man out of the good treasure of his heart brings forth good things, but an evil man out of the evil treasure brings forth evil things. So if we have individuals who blaspheme, if we have individuals who are willing to lie, if we have individuals who are guilty of using profanity, which is condemned by God, or specifically taking the Lord's name in vain, then these individuals, by definition, according to what Jesus had to say, have a heart problem. And so how many times have you seen today, well, he may have a bit of a foul mouth, but he's got a good heart. Or we're willing to overlook some of these things that he does because he's a fantastic person, or she is just wonderful in how she helps the poor, or those kinds of things where, in effect, the idea in our society today is certain peccadillos, certain problems that we might have in being righteous, and our life can be overlooked if we compensate by doing other things that the world considers to be acceptable and the world considers to be good. But it is a fact that with any sin, when we look at our culture, we look at the workplace, our companions and such, and we see all of the evil that is present, the bad things that are done, it's easy to be influenced by that, but we as Christians, we ought not to be doing these things, and there is no excuse for it, and it doesn't matter if it's speech or any other sins. But especially as we consider the moral standards that God has established by God, we ought not to be engaging in these things. Now I want you to think about what is stated in Matthew chapter 15, where Jesus is talking about what goes into the stomach is eliminated. But he said, the things which proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and they defile a man. So again, speaking specifically of speech, but in verse 19, he says, out of the heart not only comes that evil speech, but evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. And these are the things that defile a man. And so we need to recognize what God expects of us, and He expects all of our lives, all of our actions, our conduct in life, to accord with what the Scripture teaches as being the righteousness of God. Now, looking at our text, there is one point specifically I want to add, and that is the statement that with every idle word a man speaks, he will be judged. Well, that's kind of a scary thought, especially if you're like me where you talk a lot as a preacher. Every idle word that is spoken can bring judgment from God. What does the word idle mean? Does that mean if you're not always talking about the Bible, or if you're not always being encouragement, or always if you're talking about golf, or those idle words? I'm in trouble if they are. But no, that's not what that means. An idle word is a non-working word, and it references something that is not legitimate. Something that has no purpose, no office, no business around a child of God. Morally, it is useless. And what it comes from is a person who is willing to speak before he thinks. A person who doesn't have filters. One who has allowed his words to flow unguarded. Because if that is the case, there is a good chance that as a result of that, he will transgress this instruction of God. What it means is that for us, when we speak, we should know that we'll give an account for every word that we speak before God. Now, let's talk a little bit specifically about that concept of speech, because verse 37, it's hard to get past that. By your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned. Can you imagine that? You lived a life, and the life that you've lived, you've maintained faithfulness to your wife, you're very benevolent, you help the poor, you come to worship, and all of these kinds of things, but you have a hard time controlling the tongue. Well, is God going to accept you because, yeah, you've got a little problem, but that little problem doesn't compare with all the good that you have done? It's not a matter of how many moral pluses that you put on your ledger. It's not a ledger at all. It has reference to whether God forgives us, and He has told us that if our speech is not as it should be, our speech can very well condemn us. And that is an idea, a concept that is very different than the one that is embraced in our world today. So understand this, those who are guilty of sin, the only way that they can be justified from their sins is through God's forgiveness. Now, we recognize we can't earn our salvation. We can't be justified because of how many good things we've done compared to the bad things that we've done. It doesn't work that way. But there remains a question that the Calvinists and other religious individuals don't get is, who does God forgive? And God truly forgives the penitent, the individuals who are striving to do right, not those who excuse the evil that they are doing. I want to give you an example in 1 Timothy chapter 1, where the Apostle Paul is talking to his son in the faith, Timothy, and he talked about two individuals, Hymenaeus and Alexander. These individuals had suffered shipwreck of their faith, and they were blaspheming. And because of their blasphemy, we are told that that Paul delivered them to Satan, that they may learn not to blaspheme. Now, these are two men, both of whom are presented as two men who had at one point in time accepted Jesus into their lives, but they were delivered to Satan for their speech. We need to recognize just how important that is. We can't expect God to be forgiving of us if we persist in sinful actions. Yeah, I have a problem with my speech every once in a while. I have a hard time not cussing, or I have a hard time not being deceitful and lying, or I have a hard time with gossip. But look at all the good that I do. Doesn't matter. Will God hold us accountable for our words? And will He forgive us just despite the fact that we persist in evil words? And the answer to that question, as indicated by Jesus in this very context, is no, he will not do that. The judgment of God comes upon those whose speech is not as it ought to be. And so as we draw this lesson to a close, this short lesson, I just want to note how especially important it is for our speech to be pleasing to God, to secure our salvation in standing before him. Remember what James had to say in the 3rd chapter in verse 6 about the tongue and about the dangers of the tongue. We're told that a tongue is a fire. It is a world of iniquity, or a world of sin. The tongue is so set among our members that it defiles the whole body. We're told it's set on fire, or it sets on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire by hell. But again, understand what Jesus had to say here. If you're speaking, what you're saying is indicative of your heart. Is your heart a defiled heart? Because the tree is defined by the fruit. So the next time that you're out there, and it may be a friend, it may be an acquaintance, it may be a celebrity, it may be a sports figure or a movie star, it may be, unfortunately, a politician, and you hear the profanity, and you hear the gossip, and you hear the lies and the distortions that are told, and you think, well, that person's a good person. Why? Because they give a portion of their salary to charity, or they're a good person because why? Because they're good to their wife. And so we're willing to set those things aside. Well, society does that, certainly does it not. And I'm not saying that you need to come down with harsh judgment and criticism upon people who do that. I'm saying look at your own life. And to recognize while the world is accepting of individuals who may say bad things or may do a few bad things, but in the large part are good, that's not the way God works. Because we will be judged by the things that we have done in our body, judged according to the things that are written in the book, whether good or bad, as we apply those in our lives. And we need to recognize that what is important is seeking God's forgiveness. And no matter the sin, you cannot please God if you persist in it. So that's the lesson of this particular metaphor that Jesus uses here in the book of Matthew. May our hearts always be pure in the sight of our Lord. As we draw our lesson to a close, we don't know the hearts of any. It may be that you have reason to accept the invitation of God and our invitation to come forward at this time. If there is a need spiritually that you had to become a child of God or in some way to be assisted in your life as a child of God, please come now.